and welcome to this episode of Countercurrents. I'm Larry Johnson. Today I'm pleased and honored to have my friend, Professor Syed Mohammad Marandi. We're going to talk about the situation that's heating up in Iran and with the prospects for a new and expanded war. Thanks for watching. Hit the like and subscribe button. All right. Hey, Professor, thank you so much for doing this again. I didn't run you off after last session, huh?
No, thank you very much for inviting me and notice this shirt, Larry.
Yeah, no, it's outstanding. It's tasteful. People say that mine are not necessarily tasteful, but as they've told our mutual friend Nima, I said, the shirts. I'm not trying to make light or disrespect what's going on or just disrespect people I'm talking to. But my God, the world is so dark right now. We need some things to try to brighten us up, and if we can do it with shirts, great. So, you're hanging out in Sochi attending Valdai this week.
That's right. I'm in Sochi, and it's the Valdai Discussion Club. They have different conferences, but the one at Sochi is, I think, their biggest event, and so I'm here, but I'm trying to follow up on the news in our region and Ukraine, and also, see what people are saying about the general trends, the people from across the world. It's a very interesting conference, and it's it's held in a ski resort. There's no snow here at the moment, but so we're sort of a bit isolated, and it makes people, I think, interact more with one another rather than going out.
What are they saying to you about the situation, particularly this? I'll call it the Western conspiracy against Iran. Because we've seen that with this whole snapback of sanctions, I call it so-called snapback of sanctions, because how can you snap back sanctions that were actually never really taken off, right?
Yeah, the snapback is, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many in Iran, really not that big an issue, because the sanctions that are revived, the UN Security Council sanctions, they are already in place. The United States and the Europeans, and especially the United States, they threaten countries that violate American maximum pressure sanctions. So the revival of the UN Security Council sanctions is not really a big deal, especially because they are limited to more or less to the nuclear program and Iran's military capabilities. But also, in addition to that, as you know, the Russians and the Chinese have signed a letter with the Iranian foreign minister. The Iranian, Russian, and Chinese foreign ministers together signed this letter saying that they do not accept the legitimacy of the actions taken by the Europeans.
Right.
And that since they violated the deal, they have no moral or legal right to use this mechanism. And also, since they did not go through the proper means to implement this mechanism, they say it's null and void. So that sort of that dents that tool that they were using, because Iran's nuclear program is, of course, indigenous, and its military is mostly indigenous. And what it does get from abroad is from primarily these two countries. So if these two countries don't accept that the snapback mechanism has actually been deployed and the UN Security Council resolution revived, then it makes it toothless.
Right.
But it does have a psychological impact, because the markets in Iran, for a while, they're worried about what will happen. And you have all these Persian language media outlets that are funded by U.S. and Western intelligence agencies and different state organizations like BBC Persian, like Iran International, Manoto, and all these online armies that they have in Albania and elsewhere. So it does create some concern, but it has to a large degree died down. And someone told me, and I don't know if this is true because I was here in Valdai and I haven't been checking the news in Iran that much. The Taliban downed the internet in Afghanistan for reasons which are not completely clear to me yet. Some say there was something going on in Afghanistan, an attempt by the Americans to, or inside the Taliban, there were some divisions. I'm not sure about that. But in any case, when the internet went down, some of these Telegram channels that were speculating on the Iranian currency, they suddenly went blank. And this shows that this attempt to manipulate the currency is being done from outside the country by people affiliated to the West. Again, I don't know how true that is. It's something that someone told me last night when I was speaking to him in Tehran. But in any case, I think that by gradually the concern about snapback and the supposed revival of the UN resolutions that's dying down, and people are seeing that things really changed.
Well, but I dug into it. I was trying to put the whole thing in context. So before JCPOA, there were like 7 major categories of sanctions that were imposed on Iran, and the way JCPOA was supposed to work, this scheme, the snapback scheme, is, in fact, I was surprised to learn, was suggested by Russia. The Russians were the ones that, hey, we got an idea. And yet, once Trump bailed out, neither Germany, France, or the UK delivered on what they had signed up to, if my understanding is correct. So I was saying, we keep talking about snapping back, putting these sanctions back on, but they were really never lifted. But the one thing that's changed is, I would argue, Iran is in a stronger strategic position today than it was 10 years ago.
Yes, well, just one thing, and that is that the Russians did not propose this. The West proposed it.
Oh, the West proposed it.
Yes, and even back then, the Iranians should not have accepted.
Yeah.
And I think it was, back then, I thought it was a mistake. I actually, from the very beginning, I was never optimistic that the JCPOA would work, because the United States never abides by commitments, and it's not just Trump. Obama didn't abide by his commitments, nor did the Europeans after signing the JCPOA. Trump just went further than everyone else.
Correct.
And I think the snapback provisions were basically there so that after 10 years, whoever was president of the United States, they would use it against Iran, because the Americans don't give up. They don't just let go of leverage against a country that they dislike. Right now, you have Jolani in power, CIA tool, and we saw Petraeus. I mean, it was extraordinary. That was
I felt like I was being subjected to online pornography watching that. I mean, my God.
Oh, exactly. I could not watch it till the end. It was I don't know, so embarrassing for me, and just seeing that. And I literally didn't see it till the end. But to say, so. But even now that this CIA agent is in power in Syria, have they removed the Caesar Act? Have they removed sanctions against Syria?
Well, yeah. So they're in the process. They take the guy off the terrorism rewards program. They left a $10 million bounty. And the point I've made is the organization he headed up, which was supported by my former organization, they committed more terrorist acts in 2 years than Hamas did, and is alleged to have done in over 25 years. And yet we're the ones we're out condemning Hamas repeatedly, but hey, buddy, come on in. Well, and
it's amazing.
And the U.S. did it with the MEC, the Mujahideen al-Khalq. Right? In fact, has helped them carry out terrorist attacks inside Iran. So this, the hypocrisy of the United States when it comes to combating terrorism is just, it's a joke.
I was going to school. I think I was in the 10th grade, maybe. I think I was in the 10th grade. I don't remember exactly, but there was an explosion near our house, and I was getting ready to go to school, and our windows broke and shattered. And then instead of going to school, I went towards the place where there was a bomb explosion. And they wouldn't let me get near, but later on I found out that 9 or 11 people were killed, including a family of 4, I think, a father, a husband, wife, and 2 children, an Armenian family, because our neighborhood was a mixed neighborhood, so there were lots of Armenians living around us, and that's just how it was. It was Tehran and other major cities in Iran were like Baghdad, not as bad. Baghdad, during the height of those car bombs that were being carried out every day, just worse. They were worse in Baghdad. Who was carrying out those bomb attacks in Baghdad? And in Iran, it was the MEK that now has offices across Europe and North America, and they have a major base in Albania. And in Iraq, it was Jolani. It was Ashara and these people who were, slaughtering people across Iraq. And then when you see Petraeus speaking with such the way he was, I've never seen such a thing like that before. Worrying about how he sleeps at night.
Let me ask you: are you getting enough sleep?
Yeah, I'm one of your biggest fans.
God, I don't know if you know Petraeus when he was at West Point, and I know from some contemporaries of his at the time and some of his seniors, he was known as the kind of cadet who would marry the superintendent's daughter just to get ahead. And in fact, that's what he actually did. He ended up marrying the superintendent's daughter. So he's been a sycophant his entire career, in my view. Well, but another interesting side note: we both had the same accountant. I mean, I had this accountant for a while, and then he showed up one day and says, "You never guess who my new client is." I go, "Who?" And he told me, I go, "Oh my God."
But here, by the way, because you asked and I forgot to respond, at Valdai, the mood is, it's quite interesting, Larry, that in years past, when I'd come to these sort of conferences, I'd have debates and arguments, not arguments, but I'd be debating people and trying to explain Iran's position and what Iran is like and what Iranian society is like. And hopefully one day you can come. I know you've already been invited, but you couldn't make it. But hopefully in future you'll see for yourself. But now it's like I have nothing to say because everyone is, except for 1 or 2, maybe a couple of people from Turkey or the United States, except for 1 or 2 people, everyone's on Iran's side.
Yeah.
Everyone understands Iran's position. Everyone feels that Iran is morally superior to the West, and what Iran is doing to support the Palestinians is something to be supported and something to be applauded. So it's very different from what it used to be. And that's how it is generally for me as well. I sort of feel like I don't have much to say anymore because others are saying it so well.
Well, by the way, are there many Americans or even Western Europeans at the Valdai, or are they just absent?
There are a few. I mean, there are But
I mean,
again,
I'm drawing up on my own experience in June of 24 attending SPIEF, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. And, there were probably more than 80 countries represented there. But I was like one of the only Americans that was present. And
yeah,
very, very few Europeans. And it was like, how, because the thing was so vibrant and so diverse. It struck me as, the West just like cutting itself off in isolation, unwilling to recognize how the rest of the world is living.
yeah, I think that's how this conference is too. It's very global. You have people from all the different continents, from Latin America, from Africa, across Asia, of course, China and East Asia, and India, Europe too, North America as well. It's a pretty global. I haven't, of course, spoken with everyone. I don't know how everyone feels about different issues, but the people who I've spoken to, they've it's sort of the world has changed, and the United States, I think, just as I know you believe this way. I've seen you often, and I've listened and watched you. The United States has marginalized itself. It's isolated it. So have the Europeans, and you can tell when you meet these people who come from important think tanks and important centers across the world. You feel that this isolation is from what I'm seeing is quite universal and in line with what we have been seeing online. When you see these people in person, these people who are many have influence and they know what's going on in their own countries, you feel that there's a huge change. In India, I was speaking to a former Indian official who works at a think tank, a person of influence, and I was asking him, do you think that India will, I didn't say capitulate, but
cave.
Sort of cave. I don't know what term I use. I tried to be polite about it, but he said he didn't think so.
Yeah,
he was of the belief that something has changed in India, and even if Trump had backed down like he did over the tariffs with China and other issues, he said that the damage was done, but he didn't believe that India was going to back down.
Now, I'm going to use a cultural reference, and it may be unknown to you because I'm an old guy and you're not. Dale, did you ever hear of Dale Carnegie?
The name is familiar, but no.
So in the 50s and 60s in the United States, there was this guy, Dale Carnegie. He wrote a book, How to Make Friends and Influence People. And when you're looking at Donald Trump, you realize he's like the anti-Dale Carnegie. He's doing how to piss off the global South and create more enemies. It's just it's unbelievable as we watch.
How to fire a general on a whim.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You probably didn't get to see the spectacle yesterday where he assembled these 800 plus generals and admirals. Within the U.S. military, you got 4 categories of general officers. You got 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star. Actually, there's a 5th star, but that's like very, very rare, maybe one person. But the camera shot of that audience.
I think there were 2, right?
Yeah, well, there was
Eisenhower and MacArthur.
Yeah. What was interesting is when the camera from the behind on this audience, it looked like just a club of bald-headed guys. I mean, it was the number of bald heads popping up all across the audience that was predominant, and what people are just really scratching their heads trying to figure out what the hell was he doing, and I think that meeting yesterday was actually relevant to Iran because Eve Smith of Naked Capitalism said, and again, after watching, he says, this doesn't make sense. So was this a pretext to bring all these people together just so they could pull 2 of them aside? The commander of CENTCOM, which has the responsibility over Iran, and the commander of SOUTHCOM. Because right now you've got U.S. military forces, naval forces parked off the coast of Venezuela. And then we started seeing movements that were reported this week of the same kind of tankers that were flowing towards the Persian Gulf after the June 13th attacks. So she was suggesting that they use that meeting as cover, because otherwise, if they just called those two or even just the CENTCOM commander up to D.C. for consultations, and with this other reported movement in the public, it might have tipped their hand. So this is their way to try to keep it quiet. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I mean, I saw bits and pieces of the program, and I thought it was very ridiculous. But the Iranians are preparing themselves for war. They've been doing so ever since the halt in fighting, and I know that the Iranians have plans both for short term, medium term, and long term, and they're working on all of them simultaneously. So I would imagine that if there is another war tomorrow, that the Iranians would be much more prepared than they were last time around. Last time around, they weren't caught off guard. About the war itself, they knew it was going to happen, but they didn't think that the Israeli regime would target senior officials.
Right.
They thought they were going to strike military targets and the nuclear program and all that. But also, since the Israeli regime gave it its best shot, because this was obviously a so-called regime change operation, the Iranians were able to see their strong points, learn about their weaknesses, learn about their own weaknesses, and now they're restructuring, rebuilding, or improving their capabilities in accordance with the experiences that they gained during the war. So I think that if there's another round, it's going to get worse for the Israeli regime. But my assumption then is that it will be pretty bloody. I can't say for sure there will be a war. I mean, until it happens, no one can be sure about anything. But the assumption in Tehran, the military, the state, is assuming that there will definitely be a war, and that it could be quite close. It could be sooner rather than later. But I think if the Israeli regime was looking for its own interests, if it was looking out for its own interests, it would not launch a war. But I think Netanyahu his interests are not in line with the interests of the regime, and it's in his interest to continue or to expand the conflict or to create new crises, because he's losing popularity at home. Many people want the war to end. Most people apparently want the war to end. Not that they are against genocide. Their own polls say that the vast majority of Israeli Jews are supportive of the genocide, but they're tired of the war.
Yeah.
And so he's had no real success. He's slaughtered hundreds of thousands in Gaza, but he hasn't captured Gaza after 2 years. He hasn't defeated Yemen. He hasn't defeated Hezbollah, regardless of what they say. His only success was in Syria, and even that, I'm not quite sure if he and Erdogan have been successful, because I think Syria is costly both for Erdogan and for Netanyahu. And since both of them are having these, there's a conflict going over spheres of influence between the two allies, and that is going to be, Syria is going to, at least for the future, for the near future, it's going to be costly for Netanyahu. So I don't think he's achieved anything. And therefore, I think that the chances that he will expand the war again would be a way out for him, a potential way out for him to be able to extend his time in office and put off any crisis in the government for another few weeks or few months. And of course, the situation in the United States is not going well at all. And the death, I mean, Epstein, and then the death of Charlie Kirk, and whatever the reason was for his death, it hasn't gone well for the regime. And so things are not looking good, and that's why I think that would be an incentive for him to attack Iran.
Yeah, in fact, on the whole Charlie Kirk front, it's increasingly clear the FBI is they're lying. They're lying about what happened. And more people are starting to say, wait a second, because one of the motivations to vote for Trump was to get rid of people like Christopher Wray, who ironically Trump had appointed during his first term. But because the FBI was seen as so politicized. But now it's just seen as sheer, you can't attribute it to incompetence, because there appears to be something darker afoot, because the particular rifle they're claiming that was used to kill Charlie Kirk, if that rifle had been used, Charlie Kirk would have literally lost his head. The head would have disappeared in a puff of red mist. So you come back and try to figure out why are they lying about this and what's afoot. And when you step back, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt on the foreign policy front, but the lies that are being told about the war in Ukraine and about Iran, it's like this narrative has been constructed, and they're going to stick with this narrative of, Iran, the number one sponsor of terrorism in the world. And I keep coming back and say, okay, let's put together the list. Show me the attacks. And what it really boils down to is because Iran refuses to submit to the West to isolate Hamas and Hezbollah, which again, we proclaim them as terrorist organizations, when the reality was, or is, in my view, they're no different than my ancestors that were fighting the British during the 1776. Except my ancestors were Christian. These folks, a lot of them are Muslim. But it's the same principle: fighting for their land, fighting to oust a foreign oppressor. And yet, ironically, the United States, who was born in that, is now the biggest opponent to that kind of vision.
Yes, and also I think it's pretty interesting how, I think I'd like to see how Trump is going to justify another war with Iran. He has supposedly obliterated.
Yeah, I say it's all obliterated. So what's left to obliterate?
So okay, so now what? But I think that the narrative has collapsed outside of the United States. Here, where I am in this conference, it's clear that the United States does not command any respect, and I mean the state, the regime, Trump, and the political establishment. And it's not just the Russians; it's wherever you look, and people. These are not like obscure people coming from these countries. They're very influential people. I'm probably the least important person here is me, but you have some key people here who are very critical of the United States, and no one has any faith in what Trump says or does. And so, with all that's going at home and all that's happening abroad, and the contempt that exists for the Israeli regime today, I think a war with Iran is only going to make things worse. I don't want to go into detail, but someone who I had met from Turkey, who was close to the party, obviously was desperately trying to, in my opinion, try to justify the position of his government, but there's no justification. Right. Everyone has been exposed. It's clear when you speak to people that they know what's happening. We all know that Qatar and Turkey are in the American camp, and that they're not going to do anything. They have no intention to help the Palestinian people. They just want to milk, the the catastrophe to their political advantage to make themselves look better, but they are aligning themselves with the United States. Right now, the Qatari air base controlled by the Americans is being used for against Iran, and the Turkish government and the Qatari government, alongside others, they supported Trump's plan, which is it's a disgraceful plot for capitulation. But what we're seeing today, in a way, Larry, is a good thing. I mean, the genocide aside, the mass murders in Lebanon, in Yemen,
Right.
and of course in Gaza and in Iran, all that aside, everyone has been exposed for what they are. Those who pretend to support the Palestinians, but they helped the dirty war in Syria, they've been exposed. I mean, there are those who will close their eyes, like these 2-year-old babies who put their hands over their eyes and they think that their dad and mom can't see them. Yeah. These the extremist sectarian people funded by Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Erdogan and others, they will continue, to put their hands over their eyes, because that's where, they get money to do that, whether they are in media or whether they these cultural centers or religious centers all across the world. But everyone else is seeing the reality. They're seeing that these entities have done nothing for the Palestinians. They've only harmed the resistance and the axis of resistance in line with U.S. interests. And then we've seen the Israeli regime. The most important change that has taken place is that the Israeli regime is despised across the world. Mm-hmm. People who you and I respect, and I don't want to name them, but if you look at on some of these online programs, what many of our people who we both respect are saying now is very different from what they were saying a year and a half, 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And these are people who have always been critical. I mean, I'm not saying these are like, people who had admired the Israeli regime. These were people who were more clear-sighted than others, but they've changed. Yeah. And then people who used to support Israel, the regime, hate it. More people know about the history than ever before, that this October the 7th starting point and the lies that were promoted back then by the media and think tanks and Western leaders, no one buys it anymore because there's too much awareness. And
don't forget to say the worst thing that's happened to the Jews since the Holocaust.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, actually, the worst thing that's happened to the Jews since the Holocaust is Netanyahu and the Zionist regime. Yeah. Because, it reminds me of what Max Blumenthal, our mutual friend, said when he confronted Anthony Blinken, and he said, I think he said, you destroyed our religion.
Yeah.
Because all this is being done in the name of Jews.
Right.
And it's not just Jews, it's just like those who were supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Doha, in across the Persian Gulf region, in Ankara. They supported these Salafi, Wahhabi, Takfiri groups in the name, and basically said this is Islam. Mm-hmm. And so people in the West were saying, look, this is what Islam is, and it has nothing to do with Islam. This is CIA Islam. Yeah. And Zionism is not Judaism. We both have I have a host of Jewish, disproportionately my American friends are Jewish, by chance, but they're all opposed to Zionism and they're all opposed to the genocide. They've been opposed to the Israeli regime before October the 7th. But when the Israeli regime and its Western allies are constantly saying these are the Jews and Israel represents the Jews, and they're dishonestly and shamelessly attributing these atrocities to many people who are completely against it. So, and again, I just want to stress that this is not just what we see in Judaism. It's what these regional intelligence agencies linked to Western intelligence agencies did in Syria and Iraq as well, or in Afghanistan. And they basically said that this is Islam.
Well, how consequential was the Zionist attempt to murder the Hamas delegation in Qatar with that bombing in terms of Iran's relationship within, let's call it, the Arab-Islamic world? Because you had 54 countries there. And what caught my eye was, Pezeshkian was sitting down with Sisi of Egypt. And if I read it right, it said that Egypt and Iran really haven't had good relations for like 34 years.
40. I think 40. Over 40.
So it's like everywhere I look, Pezeshkian was meeting with somebody. And if anything, it looks like Iran came out sort of as the big winner out of this Israeli attempt to kill the Hamas delegation. What's your assessment?
Yeah, the Egyptian-Iranian relations, they were broken well over 40 years ago.
Okay.
And what we're seeing now is partially, if not mostly, because of what the Israeli regime is doing. And you see these improved relations. And the myth of U.S. protection for countries in the Persian Gulf region has been shattered. And, they just spent huge amounts of money for protection.
Yeah.
hypothetically, trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
To protect because these are family dictatorships. They're not, they don't represent the people. Whether in the Emirates or in Qatar, where they don't like each other, the two regimes, but their populations are very unhappy with their policies. And just as everywhere else. In Turkey, the government continues to transport oil to Israel. Ships continue to go back and forth. The overwhelming majority of ordinary Turks are completely against any relationship with the Israeli regime. But so these policies are not, do not reflect the will of the people. And so these regimes are bound to the Americans because that's what they feel keeps them in power. But on the other hand, the myth of American protection has been exposed. But they, being so deeply bound to the United States, they don't have much room for maneuver. Mm-hmm. They're not going to change their relationship fundamentally with Iran or Russia or China. And we saw that in the case of Qatar, they did the most disgraceful and humiliating thing. They went immediately to Washington. The prime minister, the foreign minister went to Washington and had dinner with Trump and Witkoff, and it was clear as day that Trump was behind the attack. The Israelis would never dare to attack without informing the Americans, because those missiles would be flying over areas that are being monitored by the United States. And there was a huge American air base close to the building that was struck.
Yeah.
They could never do that. And so, but then, they pretend as if Trump forced Netanyahu to apologize, and there was no apology. But in any case, the point is that Qatar and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, this is not good for them. It doesn't look good for them when missiles are flying over Saudi Arabia and they can do nothing about it, despite the fact that they bought trillions of dollars of weapons over the decades from the West. So it weakens them. I think that is probably the most important outcome of all this. It's just further weakening. And we're seeing things happen, for example, in Morocco, where there's unrest. And in my opinion, what's going on in Gaza, you have to link it, in my opinion, to other issues as well. There's discontent about Gaza. People are increasingly outraged. And then in these family dictatorships across North Africa and West Asia, you already have people who are very unhappy for corruption at home and the family dictatorships taking so much wealth for themselves and their cronies. And this is just going to make it more difficult for these governments in future to be able to maintain order.
Well, what did you make of the presence of Turkey? Erdogan was there. Azerbaijan was there. And Jordan was there at the Arab-Islamic Emergency Summit regarding the bombing, and they all signed off on a declaration that was highly critical, let's say, of Israel, sort of against U.S. policy. Do you think that was genuine, or were they just showing up to, as a wolf disguised in sheep's clothing, just pretending to be sheep?
I think a speeding ticket would have been more damaging to Netanyahu than that declaration.
Yeah, I'm not claiming that the action that the Arab-Islamic Summit took was consequential for Israel. You're right.
Yeah, I think it can be interpreted sort of like the statements made by a number of European countries and to recognize Palestine. And that is it's meaningless, and it's not intended to bring about a Palestinian state, but it does reflect something important, and that is that they're worried that their own people are becoming increasingly angry, and they are being seen by their own people as complicit in the genocide, which they are, because they continue to help the Israelis as we speak. And they've been doing it for 2 years, just like these regional countries are doing as well. But that just shows how the mood has changed. And I think the statement put out by these leaders is to silence discontent at home partially. So Azerbaijan, Aliyev, another dictator, he's a key ally of the Israeli regime. He sells cheap oil there, goes through Turkey. Oil from Iraqi areas in Kurdistan have been going to Turkey. Syrian oil goes to Israel through Turkey. These governments have to be seen as opposed to what the Israeli regime does, and they're not going to take any real action. I mean, the planes that fly from North America to our region, the tankers, the refueling tankers that are used to help the Israelis bomb Iran, they fly over Turkey.
Oh, right.
They fly over Turkey. They go to air base. They go to Qatar. So these are weak, Western-bound regimes, and they are weak. When I say weak, I mean Erdogan as well. Erdogan is strong when he's destroying Syria, but we recall that when that pastor, I don't remember his name, who was arrested, and he was claimed that he was affiliated to the coup attempt in Turkey, and the courts, and in court he was sentenced. When Trump threatened Turkey and imposed some sanctions and threatened more, Erdogan bowed. He bent the knee. So they're not going to. I don't see such governments ever doing anything to seriously harm the Israeli regime, but they need to be seen by their public as doing something. So right now, the flotilla, which as we speak, they may be attacking them. You saw a couple of drones from the Turkish armed forces flying over them.
Right.
But that's not real protection. That's just for show. They're not going to attack the Israelis, or they're not going to confront the Israelis when they finally board these boats. So it's basically for their own populations and to make their populations feel that they're doing the right thing, whereas they're not doing anything at all.
Well, I've been this reaction on this side within the United States, this enthusiastic reaction to Donald Trump's peace plan for Gaza, the 20-point, 21-point, or I call it Jared Kushner's resort activity, his resort initiative. When you get outside, the United States, this disconnect. I mean, everyone said, "Oh my God, this is great," and I looked at it and said, "Okay, yeah, I see that Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Arabs, and Turkey, and some other countries are praising it. Great, two-state. Yeah, this will bring about the two-state solution." And then Netanyahu's saying both in English and in Hebrew, "Hell no, there's never going to be a two-state solution." So right off the bat, that this thing, there's no way for this thing to come to fruition. It's just, it's window dressing. And yet, I'm like one of the few voices saying that, not at least in this country. Everyone else is like, "Oh, this is great." I'm going, what am I missing?
No, you're missing absolutely nothing. This is this is a proposal for the full capitulation of the Palestinian people, and these countries that signed on to it, what they did was unacceptable and shameful, and even this horrible plan, this plan to destroy Gaza and the resistance and the honor and dignity of the Palestinian people, even this plan is unacceptable for Netanyahu, as you rightly pointed out, did an interview in Hebrew saying, this, don't worry, this is nothing is going to happen. As he's not even strong enough. He's not even, and this I think shows his weakness, and that's why I think that he may lash out at Iran soon. He's not even strong enough to be able to say this in English, or not to say it at all, because the plan is a win for him and his his fanatical allies, but they are so extremist that they won't even accept this. So he has to go in Hebrew and say, no, don't worry, we're staying in Gaza, we're not moving out. The plan is basically to buy time for Netanyahu, and it because popular support in the United States for the Israeli regime has collapsed.
Yeah, it's cratering.
Yes, it's going down like a rock. So they have to, I think, try to create this image of Netanyahu seeking to bring about peace, but Hamas taking a hardline stance, and again trying to create an environment where Netanyahu gets some better publicity. But I don't think it's going to work. We've moved way beyond that. They can take over TikTok and post pictures of Netanyahu day and night, and they can buy CBS and ABC and NBC and CNN. I mean, they're already propaganda outlets for Israel, more or less. But it's not going to change anything, because people are sick and tired of all these dead babies, seeing all these dead babies day and night, and all these women with their limbs torn off, and these mothers grieving over all their children dying in front of them as the Israelis bomb their tents. People are just. This cannot be explained away anymore after 2 years.
Well, do you follow Candice Owens at all?
I was actually last night. I listened to her latest piece, like the first 20 minutes of it, and but yes, I do. I don't watch all of her material, but I am more or less following what she says, and she's now. When she speaks, she gets more viewers than anyone else.
Yeah, so when she was at the Daily Wire, the Daily Wire may have had like 2 million subscribers to the YouTube channel. She's got 5 million, by herself. But I raised her, Tucker Carlson, and Megyn Kelly, which are all being accused now of being anti-Semites. In fact, Megyn just did a piece that was highlighted by the Young Turks, where she was getting pressured to cut off all contact with those vile anti-Semites, Tucker Carlson and Candice Owens. And all that's doing is it's like, might as well pour more gasoline on a fire. It's going to burn hotter. It's going to spread. And the Israeli bullying that they've gotten away with in the past, it's really coming back to bite them in the ass on this one.
Yes, I think, I don't know if you saw that propaganda piece of that young African American and that woman.
Yeah, oh yes.
Oh,
The guy with the white hair and
yeah. I thought when I first saw the first 20, 30 seconds of it, I thought they were ridiculing Israel.
Yeah.
I thought they were, and then I didn't know who they were. Then I found that they were influencers. These people have just, they've always been so famous for their propaganda, the Zionists and the Israeli regime, and how they're able to manipulate. And it's like they're just doing the opposite now. It's like whoever's in charge now is intentionally trying to destroy the Israeli regime, and the way they conduct themselves on the battlefield. Well, it's not a battlefield; it's a slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
The way they conduct themselves in the Gaza slaughterhouse is not very different from the way they are now conducting themselves online.
Well, in fact, what they've got now is they've packaged up cow manure and trying to sell it as chocolate mousse. Okay, and people go, doesn't smell like chocolate mousse, doesn't taste like. We hate your product, and yet
exactly.
They persist. Well, let me close out with this. It appears now that as a consequence of the attacks, that 12-day war, that Iran's relationship with both Russia and China, particularly at working levels across the government, have become much deeper and more firm than was the case prior to June 13th. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yes, I think that's definitely the case. I think Iran's relations with Russia and China were always good, and there's always the liberal class in Iran, the sort of West-leaning liberal class. They've always been very hostile towards Russian and Iran-Chinese relations. But the interesting thing is that, Larry, after the 12-day war, many of these people have shifted their position. Actually, many young people who I know personally, students at my university, some of my former students, they've come to me. Students at my faculty who I don't know, they just come up to me and thank me sort of and say, I was wrong. The person I've never met before. Mm-hmm. Or some of my former students, they come and contact me, or they even come to campus just to see me, or they may be passing by and they just say hello, and they come and say, you back then we thought you were talking nonsense or you were exaggerating, but now we see, you were right. The mood in Tehran has shifted dramatically among a certain class of people. It was more than 3 years ago when we had that the Mahsa Amini demise, and then the riots and the protests, and it was clear to those who were really seriously and being honest intellectually, that there was no evidence that she was ever beaten or that she had any she was physically harassed. The footage doesn't show that. Didn't show that. The autopsy didn't show that. Now, whether they did the right thing or in dealing with her, that's another issue altogether. Right. They could have just left her alone. But they didn't do anything to her, and she died of a condition that she had beforehand. She had an operation as a child. But the real issue among the rioters and the protesters was not her. It was about many of these young people, including some of students in my own faculty. It was about Iran in their eyes is what is not letting people live their lives, and that Iran is obsessed with an animosity towards the United States. They just want to always fight wars with the Americans, and they don't want us to have the sanctions to go away and to compromise and let us live our lives. And the worldview of these people was shattered during the 12-day war, because they saw that Ayatollah Khamenei was absolutely correct. And he also was very smart, because he agreed to indirect negotiations with the Americans, even though he knew they were going to bomb Iran. And also, more recently, Iran did a deal with the International Atomic Energy Agency in Cairo, knowing that the EU was lying, that the E3 was lying, and that they were going to use a snapback mechanism anyway. And they said, we want you to negotiate with the Americans. And Iran said, fine. The Americans can go and join the P5+1. And still and they said, sign a deal with the IAEA. And they said, okay, we'll sign a deal. The Iranians knew that they were not going to do it. But what it did was that for this younger generation who did not see the war, the revolution, or they just thought that we were the ones who were obsessed and that we wanted confrontation. They saw no. So they saw it was the other way around. So the mood has changed dramatically among people. Doesn't mean that people are not dissatisfied. If you ask people, how's the economy doing? It's terrible. In general, Iranians criticize. If you go in Tehran now, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, if you sit in a taxi, or if you go into the underground, the metro, if you take a bus, people will grumble. If you sit with my friends, we never say anything good about the government. I don't. I defend Iran online in principle,
sure,
but in general, we don't sit around saying, the hospital service is really great, or the school system is. We're always saying it's terrible, and this is terrible, that is terrible. Yeah. That's our part of our culture. But there are many problems with Iran. But the point is that they recognize that Iran it's in the right, and that the United States cannot be trusted. And it's not just Trump, because the Iranians saw, and many people across the world saw, how Trump's enemies were also trying to justify the war. We saw CNN speaking about sleeper cells in the United States. And this is something that I wanted to say earlier, and I forgot. They talk about terrorism, but all of our graveyards are full of people who died because of the United States and terrorism and so on. There are no graveyards in the United States and in Europe, packed with dead people who've been killed because of Hezbollah or Iran or whatever. But you have, when Max came to Iran, I took him to the graveyard in Tehran for the war martyrs and the martyrs. And I said, all of these people died because of the West, because of U.S. policy in this region. Our graveyards are full, theirs are empty, and we're the ones who are, we're the bad guys.
Yeah.
We survived chemical weapons, but we're a threat because of weapons of mass destruction. They have actually used nuclear weapons. We don't have nuclear weapons, but we're bombed because we're being accused by them. This is the upside down world we live in. But the narrative has been destroyed, whether here in Sochi, whether in Iran, or in the United States. The emperor no longer has any clothes. And I think that is the most important thing. People across the region, it's not just Western media. The Arabic media, or the regional media funded by oil and gas wealth, for decades, they've been bad-mouthing Iran, Hezbollah, Ansarullah, the resistance. And now all of them have been exposed. Mm-hmm. So in this region and across the world, people are seeing the reality of Palestine and who sincerely supports the Palestinian people. You see in Western countries more protests against the Israeli regime than you do see in regional countries. You see people in the West and across the globe taking part in this flotilla and putting their lives at risk. But you see countries in our region doing business and trade, selling oil, purchasing gas from the regime. All of these people are now exposed. The Israeli regime has been exposed. And I think this is more important than anything else. What goes on in Gaza, what has happened in Gaza is horrific. It is a Holocaust. However, everyone has been exposed. And in order to create a better future, the most important thing is for all of us to see reality as it is.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more, my friend. Couldn't agree more. Brother Marandi, thank you for taking an hour with me. And I look forward to an opportunity in the future where we can actually maybe have a conversation face to face. That'll be great.
Well, we may actually be meeting each other sooner rather than later, and I'll try to wear this shirt.
Hey, maybe I'll try to bring you one of these.
That would do even better.
Okay. Hey, listen, thanks so much. I'm going to stop the recording there. All right. I appreciate you taking the time to watch my conversation with my friend, Syed Mohammad Marandi, professor and excellent commentator on the events of the day. This has been another episode of Countercurrents. Please hit the like and subscribe button. Tell somebody else, hey, you might like to, if you want to know something about Iran and current events, check this out. I'm Larry Johnson. Thanks for watching. Bye.